This is an $1,800 chainsaw. This is a $300 chainsaw that pretty much does the same work. I've had this saw for about a year and this saw for about 3 years. And today I want to try to give you my opinion on, is it really saving you money buying these cheap saws, or are they just junk that you should throw away, get a real saw you can depend on? Now, my point of reference on this is that, I primarily review equipment for a living. And a year ago, when I got this cheaper saw, I published a video comparing these, and that video got 700,000 or 800,000 views just on YouTube, plus all the other platforms. So, I got a lot of comments and a lot of people giving me feedback. People who had owned these saws or who had had this saw for 20 years. And a lot of opinions. I took all those opinions in, and I'm going to try to, well, you know what? We're going to summarize at the end. But right now, I want to take this saw out and put it in some wood and see how it runs today. So, I used it a lot, then I let it sit for like 3 months. And then I started using it again. I used it a lot, and then it's been sitting again. This thing hasn't been started, quite a while. It's been at least 2 months since I started it. It's freezing cold out here. We're going to take it out and just do a little cutting. And then we'll come back in here and I'll give you my thoughts on it. To know exactly how long I've had this, I'd have to go back and check when I published the video. I'm thinking it's been a year and a half. But primarily this saw lives in this shed. So it's not getting rained on. It's got a roof over it, but it's also open air. So it's not really protected from the elements either. So this thing has a primer bulb. It's got a choke on it. It's got an on-off switch. So we got it on. We got it primed. So I just pulled this rope about 30 times, and I'm making myself look even dumber than I am. It's got a stop sign here, and I always see that stop sign is up and think that shutting it off is up, but the stop sign has an arrow under it. It says down. So I've pulled it about 30 times with the off switch off and the choke on. So we'll see if that makes it hard to start now. So tonight, I thought I had my mind made up what I was going to say when I did my review on this Proyama chainsaw. And tonight I have more problems with it than I've ever had in the past. So let me walk you all the way through it. First, my perspective on this. I'm not a chainsaw expert. I'm not a small engine expert. I'm not a professional sawyer. I'm not a logger. I cut my own firewood to burn in this wood stove, and I burn in here all winter, and I sell what I can't burn. I probably cut between 5 and 10 cords per year. I also occasionally will get paid to go cut down a tree on someone else's property or do something like that. I do some stump grinding, which requires you to take a stump that's this tall and cut it off at ground level, and these are big stumps. I probably cut down 10 or 12 trees in the last year, and that's how much I use a chainsaw. But I might go 3 months without touching a single chainsaw. And then the next month I might run one every third day. It's just kind of sporadic. And if you're a professional and you run saws all day, every day, you know more about this than I do already. I'm not trying to teach anyone about chainsaws. I'm just sharing my experience using this specific saw. So let's contrast it. This is the Stihl 500i. It's an $1,800 chainsaw. I have never picked this up and had trouble starting it. Not one time in 3 years. And it's just phenomenal. 3 pulls normally. There have been a couple times when maybe I had to pull it 4 or 5 times. But I've never been like, dang, why won't this start? Not when I shut it off hot and then restarted it. Not after it sat for 3 months. It just runs, and it runs right all the time. And so we can't have a comparison there between that saw and this saw. They're not in the same price range. The question is this one worth the money? Because for a guy who doesn't use a chainsaw every day, $1,800 is ridiculous for a chainsaw. And you can get this chainsaw for $300. Now the cheapest, I actually have a saw that compares more directly across to this in size and power, and that is the MS391 from Stihl. That is a $600 chain. I think it's about $700 chainsaw. And I would say we did a cut test between this saw and the 391. And cut speed, power, everything like that, these saws were about equal. So that's a fair comparison. So this is less than half the price. So my experience with this, I used it as my only saw that I used for 3 months. Everything I did, and it was during the firewood, during the cutting season, every time I picked up a chainsaw, I only used this one for 3 months. And it ran great the entire time. Never had any problems with it. Then I said, okay, my trial period is up. I'm just going to use whatever saw I want. Well, that's the 500i. I used the 500i for a while. And probably 3 months went by, and I thought, you know, I owe it to the viewers to use this saw a little bit. And so I used it a couple more times, and I let it sit for 3 more months. However long it was. I'm not keeping track exactly. I let it sit for a while. Then my son wanted to start doing firewood. I taught him how to use a chainsaw using this. And he ran it some while he was doing firewood. Then he moved on to something else. He got a job that he's working 60 hours a week and going to school. So he quit doing the firewood stuff. And then it sat again. And this is the first time in a while I picked it up. And it ran. And I've really... The only problems I've had with it, there are 2. And one is sometimes, there's been a handful of times, and one of them was tonight, where I had to pull the rope 20 times to get it to start. Or I'm fiddling with the choke on it, or messing around with it a little bit. But every single time I've got it to run, and then once it got warmed up, it ran all right. The second problem also happened today, which is sometimes the clutch on it sticks. And I've had that happen with other saws where if the chain brake isn't on, the chain is moving even if I'm not pulling the trigger, and they're not supposed to work that way. At idle, this isn't supposed to spin. Now the last time that happened, I took the cover off, I sprayed it out with WD-40. That might have been the wrong thing to do. I'm not a chainsaw expert, I don't know. And I blew it all out, cleaned it out, sprayed in there, and then it seemed to work better. And then it was doing it again tonight. So if you do know more than I do about chainsaws, then tell me what is the fix for that. Matter of fact, this has a different clutch style in it. I'm going to grab a scrinch and show you the difference on this clutch. So while I'm taking this apart, I'll tell you a little bit about the chainsaw. This is a Chinese copy of a Japanese design. If you've ever had a Zenoa chainsaw or a Redline chainsaw, I believe actually a bunch of different brands have copied this chainsaw design, and it's been sold by a lot of your mid-tier chainsaws. I think Craftsman sold a version of this chainsaw in the past. So this design has been around a long time. It was originally a Chinese chainsaw. Now it's been copied by other brands, and it's made by Proyama. And this has what I would call an outboard clutch on it. See, I don't know if that clutch gets oil in it, if that's the problem, but the clutch, you have to slip the chain over the clutch, which makes it a little bit of a hassle, but that's an obvious notable difference. So if you've ever had a chain that had that outboard clutch instead of the steel type inboard clutch, then you probably had a saw that was similar to this one. Let's see if I can answer the question. If I had $600 to spend on a chainsaw, what would I buy? Well, I'd buy a stihl, probably 261, but I don't think you can get a 261 for $600. I think that's more like an $800 saw. I would absolutely, for my first chainsaw purchase, get a stihl. I would spend the extra money. And some people like Husqvarna, some people like Echo, whatever your preference is. On a first saw, I would spend that extra money. Because I do think, well, I don't know. I can't speak to those other brands. Because I've only used the other brands a little bit. But I've got a bunch of stihl chainsaws. And I feel like they are a little bit more reliable than this one. Although, you know, my stihl MS-250, I fight with it whenever I try to run it. So, if I had let's say I had $800 to spend on a chainsaw, I'd get a stihl. So who do I think is an ideal customer for this saw? If you already have a stihl MS-250 chainsaw that you use most of the time, but you'd like to be able to run a bigger bar, that's when this comes in handy. Because stihl saws are reasonably affordable unless you want a big one that can handle a big bar. That's when you get into $1,000, $1,200, $1,500, $2,500 chainsaws. And that's where I think my first saw, I'd get something I knew was dependable, I knew I could get parts for, but for a second saw to run a bigger bar on, or a backup, that's when I would go with a brand like this. Because for most of us, it just doesn't make sense to buy a saw that costs as much as that 500i. So I don't know if that answer was helpful to you, but I'm not trying to come up with a certain answer. I'm just telling you what I think about the chainsaw. And I've had it for a year, and it's alright. I appreciate you taking time to watch the video. I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.